Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Thursday, and now our show begins. Briahna, hello.
Hello, Robby. It's always a pleasure.
What do we have?
Well, Yahoo News' Kevin Cirilli joins us later. We'll get into new developments in the collapse of FTX. Plus, we'll discuss the Biden administration's push for over $30 billion in new aid to Ukraine. But first, Nancy Pelosi is set to announce her future plans today as Republicans consolidate around their House majority. Pelosi must decide whether she'll seek a place in Democratic House leadership. Back in 2018, the Speaker committed to limiting herself to 4 more years in a leadership position. This year, Pelosi turned 82 years old.
Meanwhile, over in the Senate, Mitch McConnell was reelected as minority leader, squarely defeating challenger Rick Scott. Scott's bid for leadership was the first time McConnell has been challenged in 15 years. According to Axios' Elena Treen, at least 10 Senate Republicans voted against McConnell during the conference's secret ballot vote. When asked about adversary Donald Trump's 2024 bid for president, here's what the minority leader had to say.
The way I'm going to go into this presidential primary season is to stay out of it. I don't have a dog in that fight. I think it's going to be a highly contested nomination fight with other candidates entering, and it's all going to be quite good for you all to cover.
Slow and steady wins the race, as the turtle knows. That's Mitch McConnell's nickname.
I'm aware. I mean, so what do you think that's about? Do you think that that's a little bit of fence sitting, not wanting to put your thumb on the scale when you don't know what the outcomes are? Is that just good leadership? Or are people reluctant to come out against, or some people at least reluctant to come out strongly against Donald Trump, despite the fact that the media seems to be on board with the idea that Trump is out and DeSantis is in?
Yeah, McConnell has always taken this line, really except for January 6th and the ensuing fallout. That was really the first time he had spoken up and said, no, absolutely not, no. And then he took a lot of flack for that. That hurt him. I mean, he's facing a leadership challenge for the first time, or did face, he survived it. Probably because of that. We don't know which senators necessarily voted against him. I saw that Josh Hawley tweeted, I was one of the 10. We don't know for sure. There's no way to verify, but presumably he was. But it's kind of I guess that's a kind of virtue signaling in a sense. That's really telling Trump voters that, like, I'm one of you. You know, I didn't turn on you. I want this guy out, even if the party didn't end up actually taking the steps to reject him.
Yesterday, you were making this interesting distinction between kind of being the most right and being conservative, like the Trump faction versus the more whatever you would want to call the other faction.
Right.
And it is interesting to see those lines shape and reshape itself, because in some ways, there was this really great piece that was run, I think, in the New York Times about what Trumpism was as opposed to Donald Trump. And what you've seen is this separation of this idea of what it means from a kind of rhetorical approach and somewhat of a policy approach and what Trumpism is. But it's been separated enough from Donald Trump that you are seeing these different manifestations of people who are able to pick up his mantle, potentially Ron DeSantis, without all of the baggage. And we're in this position right now of trying to figure out what parts of the Trump phenomenon were actually the ones that were most appealing, and whether or not some of the things that the media said were his downsides actually were detriments to his success, as opposed to part of his charm.
Well, and DeSantis, before being governor, was a member of the House in Florida, and had a pretty kind of Tea Party, stereotypical for quite conservative Republicans at the time. It took all the opinions you would have expected a Republican from like 2008 to 2014 to take. If he defeats Trump, if he claims the crown, does he have to do Trump's policies, or are there policies that are more natural to him being in that mold that he'll revert to? Or has Trump changed things, and now it's just changed, and those policies will be old-fashioned, will be out of hat? That's what remains to be seen, really. Yeah,
well, look, I break some of this down in my radar today because I have some suspicion that Ron DeSantis is a little bit of an untested, in terms of a national scale figure. And I do think that sometimes the mainstream media, they love and they hate Trump. They're in this weird masochistic relationship where they say that Trump needs to stick to the teleprompter. They say that Trump needs to calm down. They say they like the idea that Ron DeSantis is Donald Trump without all the baggage and the unpredictability, like a bull in a china shop. But they also criticized Donald Trump for having a boring speech the other night, and everyone seems to want him to dance, baby, dance.
I mean, I've said it I think I've said it before on the show. It's the Dark Knight. It's Batman and Joker. Kill you. What would I do without you?
Yeah.
That's the exact dynamic they have. Well, speaking of the Sunshine State, Governor Ron DeSantis attempted to take the temperature down a notch when he told the press to chill out over reports of a civil war brewing in the GOP. Let's watch that.
We just finished this election, okay? People just need to chill out a little bit on some of this stuff. I mean, seriously, we just ran an election.
Yeah, that's the tact he's going to take. He's going to say, everybody calm down. I think that's good advice in some sense, especially with Civil War rhetoric, which is something that a specific segment of, I don't know, extremists, probably there's some on both sides of that being like, yes, let's tear the country apart, let's riot in the streets, etc. But
yeah, I mean, look, on one hand, as a leftist, I gotta say, I'm jealous of the idea that there could be a challenge to a leadership position. And that's just, obviously, this is the first
we
time
glossed right over
McConnell
Nancy Pelosi. She's sitting pretty. If she wants to be my House Minority Leader, they'll roll out the red carpet for her.
Right, despite her making a pledge not to continue to pursue a leadership
Her deputies
position.
will ritualistically, so that she can step up.
It's true. Look, I think there is a world you can get into where it devolves into something that's ugly and not constructive, and the distinctions that people are making between their policies and who should be leader are not constructive. But it doesn't actually seem especially ugly on the right. There are clear ideological lines that are being drawn. People are making their voices known. A vote happened. They weren't successful, and we're moving on. And in some ways, the suppression that's happening on the left of any upstart voices is causing there to be a messier situation, kind of a little bit under the skin, like we saw in the case of the CPC letter, where a banal letter saying, hey, let's push for peace in Ukraine, becomes a much bigger story because they try to suppress it and because there's so much antagonism for people within your own ranks who dare to have a different opinion from leadership.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say on the McConnell front, imagine if remember McConnell spent money, the $250 million to help Republican Senate candidates get elected in this cycle, and then millions and millions in previous cycles. So they have some loyalty to him. Blake Masters lost. Dr. Oz lost. Herschel Walker might lose. What if Trump could have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on those candidates, gotten them through, and then you could have a different leader in the Senate. But Trump doesn't put his money where his mouth is.
Yeah.
So he only spends his money on himself. So this is the result.
Yeah, you can't argue with that. You can't argue with that. Well, we'll get into this a little bit more on My Radar coming up next.